Welcome, everyone. We're glad to have you here for Coming to the Center. Um, I'm Holly E. Moore, and Coming to the Center is a program of Hill Seminary, which serves pagan and nature-based communities with education and empowering students to advance academically and lead spiritually. We're all online. This afternoon, and let's ask everybody, if you will, to mute yourself. We'll have a time in a little bit that we can ask questions of our guest. And if you want to, you can put those questions into the chat. And at this time, I'd like to welcome Arnold Bustillo. Arnold is special to Cherry Hill. He's taught for us before, and he's also now our business development manager and on the publishing end of things.
Hey,
So,
hey, hey.
hello, mute yourself, please. Apart from his spiritual work, Arnold has shared with us, you probably saw on our announcement that he's a gay military veteran of the Iraq War and served in silence during the time of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. But he has moved in recent years to devotion to and writing about Santa Muerte. And so at this time, I'd like to ask you to share with us, Arnold. Tell us about your journey and about your connection to Santa Muerte.
Sure. Yeah, thank you for having me. Hello, everyone. Um, I was born in Los Angeles, and I lived there most of my life. In 2016, around about, my mother had invited me to visit her in Baja California. She retired to the city of Tijuana, which is just if you know the geography, it's right on the border of the U.S. As soon as you cross the border, you're a hop, skip, and a jump away from San Diego. Um, and that was where I first saw Santa Muerte, which I didn't realize what it was when I first saw her. I remember I was walking. My mom was showing me around, and we were downtown in the central shopping district, and I saw this figure out the corner of my eye across the street. It was about the size of a small child, like, imagine a 10-year-old, so probably about up to my hip. So it was fairly big. Like I said, I saw it from across the street, and it was this Santa Muerte figure, who, again, I didn't know what it was. I asked my mom, and she explained to me that is Holy Death, Saint Death, um, which is how you say Santa Muerte in English. And she explained to me that she was very popular here in Tijuana, um, and that it completely fascinated me, both from just a cultural perspective. I had never seen anything like that. It was just basically, if you imagine the Grim Reaper, that's what I'm talking about. And I had never seen anything like that before. I wanted to learn everything I could about her and her tradition. My mother, on seeing how fascinated I was, she took me around to more altars. And the altars were kind of like uh, you had to know where to go. They weren't always visible from the street because there is still some taboo around this veneration of death. Um, but the way I tell people is that my journey as a devotee started by placing a golden candle on one of her altars for help with business. And eventually I went home, and I had intended to create kind of a digital diary for myself where I could collect, prayers or thoughts, interesting links or videos about Santa Muerte, and then that I published it as a website, and to my surprise, other people found it somehow and started visiting it and contacting me about Santa Muerte. And then I have been on that spiritual path ever since. Santa Muerte, for those who might be completely unfamiliar, like I said, she is holy death, and the general consensus seems to be that she is the personification of death itself. Um, there, uh, because of um, where she comes from, I say that the cradle of Santa Muerte is Mexico, but she has spread to all corners of the world. I have been contacted by devotees and interested people from far outside of Mexico, as far as Europe. I have seen people in Russia on social media talking about Santa Muerte. And yeah, she's just become a big part of my life. And I've been publishing books about her and devotion to her um, ever since I learned about her. Um, but uh, yeah, I think that's good by way of an introduction. Let me know if I might have missed anything or if you have any questions so far.
Yeah, well, we want to know all the secrets, but
Mm.
I'm wondering right now as a mother, I'm wondering, what did your mother think about this intense interest?
Mm. My mother has always been and still is a very spiritual woman. I remember growing up in Los Angeles, going with her to what are called botanicas, which are like spiritual supply shops where you can buy herbs, folk remedies, also spiritual items like candles or stones, tarot cards. The people who work there usually offer limpias, like cleansings, spiritual cleansings. And so this is kind of what I grew up with her. Um, seeing the books that she would buy in her room, and seeing little altars around the home. And my mother actually was born in the U.S., but had to go live with her grandmother from a very young age. And on my mother's side, if you go back far enough, I don't identify as native at all. But if you go back far enough through my mother's uh, ancestry, they come from a tribe of people known as the Yaqui, which basically straddle like the Arizona-Mexico border. And so that's where her grandmother would have learned her traditional healing arts, spiritual practices from her elders.
Hmm.
And because my mother, as a young girl, had to go live with her grandmother, she saw a lot of practices that were um, indigenously influenced, and also because of the time she was growing up in, blended with modern practices like Catholicism, which would have been popular in the 50s and 60s, um, especially around the places that where my grandmother was living, or her grandmother, excuse me. And so um, I think because of that, I don't think she was surprised that one, there was this interest, being her son, but also an openness to discuss it.
Oh,
Because my mother told me stories of people who would come to her grandmother's house and ask for, help. Either maybe it was a home remedy for something, which there was a lot of that apparently, from what my mother said, and also more spiritual remedies. So receiving limpias, cleansings, receiving um, charms, blessed items, things like that. And so with my mother, there was never, I don't think it bothered her at all, this interest in Santa Muerte. And even she is very spiritually open in that she is, I think, what we might call eclectic. So, like, if you walk through my mother's apartment, you'll see small altars, and small indications that there is a lot of blending of spiritual practices from all over the world.
huh. Well, now, I guess we think of the culture, the predominant religious culture in that part of the continent to be Catholic
Right.
is, but I've also read that the Catholic Church is really not big on Santa Muerte. Can you talk to us a little bit about that and why they would be opposed?
Um, Theologically, the explanation I have heard from priests, Catholic priests in Mexico especially, is that Jesus Christ represents victory over death. He he was dead and then resurrected, so he defeated death, and it is through Jesus. I'm not a Catholic, but this is what I remember from my Sunday school. It is through Jesus that Catholics and Christians receive eternal life, the promise of eternal life. So when you are welcome into the fold of Christianity, Catholicism, Jesus, you no longer have to fear death. You will live eternal, right? Uh, and so that's the theological basis. Politically, you know, the Catholic Church has had a lot of influence on the way, especially Mexicans, live their lives. If people do not wholeheartedly believe the stories of the Bible, very usually they would consider themselves like cultural Catholics. They will still have Christmas, they will still have Easter, they will go
Yeah.
through the motions. They may even pray to something like, Saint Joseph or the Virgin Mary or Jesus directly if they feel like they need to. Um, so even among non-believers, there is still a lot of it's still very much intertwined with the culture, and Mexico is generally still it is changing, it's getting better, but it's still a very conservative kind of machismo, the man is the head of household kind of culture. Again, it's changing and getting better, but that is where the history comes from. And in the Catholic Church is very patriarchal. Santa Muerte is a woman. That might have something to do with it. Um, but when you hear about Santa Muerte and you hear about this death devotion, it is often it is tolerated, but often not celebrated. And when it comes to the church, it is officially and directly denounced. They tell people do not have anything to do with it. It is of the devil.
Hmm. You know, it's interesting you point out the patriarchal dominance, and yet you've got this strong culture of the Virgin Mary, the Blessed Virgin.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems like the gender thing would not be as much of a problem, doesn't it?
I have found it is often a tool of convenience. You are right.
Uh,
When it is convenient for the man to say this is the way it's going to be because I'm the head of household, I'm the breadwinner, then they will remind you that Christ is the head of the church and etc. Uh, but then, yes, you are right. There is also this. I think it actually comes from that machismo, macho attitude of wanting to care for and venerate the women in your lives, especially your mothers,
mhm.
your grandmothers. Um, and so I think that's why the Virgin Mary is held in such regard. It is uh, they respect the Virgin Mary because she is the mother of God, and you respect your mothers in this culture.
Okay, so that's not just a cliche. I'm neither Catholic nor Hispanic, so
Mm.
I'm listening with interest. So what I'm hearing is that's actually part of the culture.
Right, and it is also still getting better. But I remember hearing, sometimes the culture shock. It's not so much of a shock, but I just observe it with interest. Where I've heard young people say something like, oh, I was going to go to Mexico City for college, but my grandma thought it'd be better if I stay at home, and so they stay at home.
Oh,
That
wow.
kind of thing. Yeah,
Gosh. Yeah. I am trying to remember the name of the person who did the series on cable a few years ago called Believer. Uh,
Reza Aslan.
yeah, Reza Aslan. That was a great. um, episode that he did on Santa Muerte. It was just
Yeah,
wonderful to see all the figures and the people who had put up altars and the altars that were out, like, as you say, they're out in the streets, but you still have to kind of know where to go.
right, right.
But Santa
Um,
Muerte is specifically Mexican, is that right?
um,
Or has been?
it has been, yes. And when I go back into the history, I go to about the year 2000, the turn of the millennium, and that was when she really exploded onto the world stage. And that the spark for that was a neighborhood in Mexico City called Tepito. It was in Aslan's piece. He went there. Um, and that was kind of where it all started. There, as you go further back, the records become more ambiguous, not as clear.
Mhm.
There is a lot of effort to decolonize Santa Muerte, to take her down to the indigenous roots. And there are indigenous roots, I admit, but there is a lot of blending that has
Mhm.
happened through the years. But for the local manifestation, if you want to talk about what would we recognize if we were able to go back in time and see Santa Muerte devotion as it has been practiced, we would most likely be familiar with it only to about the mid 1900s, 1950s, 1960s. That's when you started to see charms, love charms, especially. That's when you started to see this cloaked figure being shared among friends, hearing stories from elders with the scythe and the black cloak. That's only the record. I'm sure it goes back much further, but the records again become a lot more thin and not as reliable. Um,
What can you tell us about those indigenous roots and the blending subsequently?
yeah, so the last I read, um, the earliest record we have of indigenous people venerating what appeared to be a skeleton, and actually including this image of a skeleton in their ritual. The earliest record we have of the indigenous people doing that comes from around the early 1700s. It was about 200 years after the arrival of the conquistadors in uh, North America.
Uh-huh.
So 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Would have been like the 1690s, early 1700s, like I said. The problem with that record, though, is that it is through the eyes of a colonizer. It's a Spaniard writing about what he is observing the indigenous people doing. And he says, yeah, these people are dancing around this skeleton. I don't know I don't know what the hell's going on. It wasn't like an interview piece. He didn't, I don't even know if he could even communicate with the indigenous. But that's the earliest that we saw of, what we could call death devotion. Um,
Mhm.
the problem there is then, while there was this incorporation of death and this veneration of death, again, it probably extends, way before that. But this is the first time somebody actually wrote it down and shared it with the rest of the world. But as you go further back and you look at the indigenous ties, there were gods of the dead and gods of the underworld and myths about these figures. Um, and there is evidence that they would have prayed to these gods, petitioned them for whatever they wanted, or whatever they thought the gods could help with. But if you look at pictures of um, Aztec and Mayan deities, especially, uh, there they there isn't one that is actually just a skeleton. A lot of times, they appear humanistic, and they almost look just like you would imagine, like a tribal elder, or like a what we might call a chief of a tribe.
Uh-huh.
Just someone adorned with feathers and stones and medallions and things like this. or perhaps even animals like snakes. Um, the imagery that we see of Santa Muerte today is very European. The black robe is very much like a European monk. The scythe that she carries, that's an implement that comes from Europe. That did not exist in the Americas first. It comes from, we believe, Eastern Europe, like Moldova, Ukraine kind of region. That's
Mhm.
where the scythe comes from. And so even today, when you see people trying to take Santa Muerte back to her indigenous roots, they will give her the scythe, which is a wholly European implement, a tool of European agriculture. Um, but then they will also at the same time adorn her in like feathers and beads and perhaps indigenous animals. So even today, there's this blending.
Yeah, this is so interesting. I had never thought about the robe and the hood and all of that
Yeah.
being European. But it probably, if it's like most um, practices, it probably was an overlay to something existing. I mean, everybody,
I have, I will tell you off the record for everyone here. I won't give you a reference for this because it's not widely accepted. I have not heard it widely talked about, but I did have a conversation with a researcher who hypothesized that um, the development of Santa Muerte, of being this European appearing figure, but also something that is prayed to the way the indigenous might have um, prayed to gods of the dead, it, it could have been born of essentially a misunderstanding or a misinterpretation of the the Catholic story. What I mean by that is that what this researcher was saying, again off the record, is that when the conquistadors came to the Americas, they had a mandate to convert the indigenous and to make them Catholics.
right?
The first arrivals of conquistadors, they would have had no way to communicate with the indigenous. And likewise, the indigenous would have had no way to communicate with the Europeans. So it is possible then that as they were forcibly converting the indigenous, they were using pictures to tell the Catholic story. And no matter where you come from, anywhere in the world, you're going to know what a skeleton is. Oh, that's a dead person.
Yeah.
So it is possible that they showed as they were explaining the Catholic story, this is our God, his name is Jesus, he's three in one. He died and was born again. How do you convey to an indigenous person that this God of yours died? You might show them the skeleton. And for the indigenous, as they are hearing this story of, or trying very hard to understand the story of a new God, which they now had to worship, um, they may have seen, oh, this thing killed your God. What a weak God. Why would you pray to the weakling who died and was defeated when this is more powerful than your God? And so again, very possibly it could have been, oh, this thing that looks like a European monk, a skull dressed in a robe, killed your God, and you're forcing us to take on this story. Um, we'll take that idea because we have a concept of death and we already pray to death. We'll just pray to your God of death. You know, there could have been some effort like Santeria to take what was being forced on them and still retain their own traditions.
Yes. Wow. So, um, what do you wish people knew about Holy Death?
Um, I think I wish that people understood how necessary just the concept is. Even in the United States in our modern day, you know, we do not die out loud. When people are going through death, they're put in rooms and hospital beds, and people just don't discuss it the way I think we should. And I think uh, Santa Muerte devotion and acceptance is a good doorway to accepting what is a fact of life. Even the Catholics, like I mentioned earlier, the Catholics talk about how Jesus defeated death, and therefore, you should pray to Jesus, not death. But even them, I think, at least the ones who take a hard line against Santa Muerte, they are forgetting the essential role of Santa Muerte in that story. Jesus could not have resurrected without being accepted by death. You cannot resurrect what is not dead. So death is necessary for the resurrection and the miracle.
Mhm.
You take away death, and he did nothing miraculous.
Mhm.
And so I think, yeah, I just wish there was more of an under. It's almost like saying, I came from my mother, so I'm going to forget my father. Well, there's still two parts to the equation that are necessary. And if you're a devout Catholic, you have to recognize that death it is a fundamental part of that equation for the resurrection.
So what's the draw for someone like you to Santa Muerte? What do you get out of that relationship?
Um, I think for me, it is very much a way of life that um, allows me to express myself spiritually. I've always had a problem with um, God worship. Um, I've always had I even to this day, I would describe myself as an atheist in that I don't live my life as if there is a God who is pulling the strings or controlling it.
Mhm.
Um, if there is a God that did exist, the watchmaker argument, if there is a God that put everything into motion, I don't think he, she, or it is alive um, currently. I've never felt embraced by the idea of God, but through death, through something very real and tangible, I've been allowed to express myself spiritually, to explore my my inner spiritual thoughts through something that I can hold on to. I have, as I said in my book, Santa Muerte Devotion 101, I have no idea if God exists. Um, but I am totally certain that death exists and that it will come for us. She will come for us, all of us. And that's actually very comforting. As I've said in other writings, the beauty of death is that nothing lasts forever. And while that is, most people think of that to mean that, on one hand, you should make every effort to enjoy what you have in life because it will not last forever. Take those moments with your loved ones. Uh, take those moments for yourself to do things that you enjoy. But then also, when things get bad, if nothing lasts forever, then neither will the bad times. Those also must come to an end.
I think you used the term one day with me recently, a good death, preparing for a good
Mm.
death, which I know is also
Yeah,
a Buddhist term, but I found that interesting in light of Santa Muerte.
yeah.
I have to wonder, since you put in your bio the war experience, is there a connection there? Can you say anything about Santa Muerte and your having been a veteran? Or your being a
Yeah,
veteran, excuse me.
yeah. I was in Iraq twice. The first time I was at a detention facility. I was basically a prison guard, a tower guard. And then the second time I drove a Humvee through Baghdad as a member of a transition team. So I was a military policeman. And after the Saddam Hussein regime fell, the U.S. broke it, so we had bought it and we had to rebuild the country. And so my job was to be a member of this team, and we went around to Iraqi police stations, trying our very best to make sure they were respecting international law. They weren't beating up their prisoners. They had the resources they needed. They had the training they needed, basically from the ground up.
Yeah.
And so, but also in that capacity, if you're a military policeman, you're still 911. If anybody needed assistance, or a cordon, or an armed response, we would take the call if we could. And so there was a lot of death there, just everywhere. I mean, I remember just seeing, bodies being moved like logs. That's how many there were. They had to be stacked. And uh, and I think at that time I had not known anything about Santa Muerte, or this idea of death devotion. But when I discovered Santa Muerte, it allowed me to kind of retroactively um, come to terms more or better with what I had experienced. Because, as someone who I consider myself very liberal, I very much was a product of my time. I enlisted at 17. It was only 2 years earlier that the towers had fell. I remember seeing Colin Powell and George Tenet, who was CIA director at the time. They were testifying in front of Congress. Nobody really knew anything other than that a response was needed. And I bought it hook, line, and sinker. And I said, I gotta go. I gotta do something. I gotta feel like I'm taking part.
Yeah.
And but then, as the bleeding heart liberal in me, uh, just felt so devastated that these people had to live in that environment.
Mhm.
No matter how much we told ourselves we were doing a good thing, there were constant examples of we could have done much better. And but then, as I matured and discovered Santa Muerte, it not only, like I said, allowed me to come to terms with the physical death, but also finding peace with myself and dealing with uh, perhaps what I would say the inadequacies that I had no control over. There is a time where even your feelings of guilt or dissatisfaction must die. And just personally, on an individual level, especially for people who have no power, no money, um, you have to get back to your life. No matter how bad things were in the past, those have died. Thank goodness Santa Muerte accepts us all, and will come for all, because that allows me then to move forward more peacefully with myself.
So, yeah, say a little bit more for people here, and this may be new, about going to Santa Muerte for petitions and favors.
So because she comes from, again, I already explained the roots of Santa Muerte and the modern manifestation of her devotion. Because of that modern blending, or maybe not blending, but just having to live side by side with Catholicism in a deeply Catholic country, um, a lot of the devotional practices look very Catholic. So I had to, I consulted one time for an independent filmmaker who wanted to get their character right, and their character was a devotee of Santa Muerte. And there were certain things I noticed that, um, because of my on the ground experience in Mexico with Santa Muerte, but also my upbringing as a cultural Catholic, there were just little things that you notice that go hand in hand. So, for example, when a Santa Muerte devotee wants to pray to Santa Muerte, or ask for a petition, or petition Santa Muerte, they will often do it as if they were petitioning the Virgin Mary or Jesus Christ. They might clasp their hands together in prayer. They might kneel on one or both knees. They might go before an altar and where there are offerings being made uh, to whoever they are praying to, Santa Muerte, the Virgin Mary. On any of those altars, a Santa Muerte altar or a Catholic altar, you will see people leaving flowers and candles. Depending on the vices of the saint, you might see cigarettes and candies and Coca-Cola. Um, so what I always tell people is that if you have nowhere to start, or if you can't find any information about Santa Muerte that you're looking for, a good place to start is to ask yourself, well, how would the Catholics do this? Would the Catholics say a string of prayers to the Virgin Mary? Okay, well, if I want something from Santa Muerte, that's probably a good place to start. Again, just because of that blending. And then also, Santa Muerte is a folk saint. You know, there are a lot of folk practices that people will bring in. And actually, even the more traditional Catholics, you'll see them bring in, you know, they might make a charm with like using the medallion of Saint Jude or using the medallion of the Archangel Michael, something like that. And so there is room for like creating charms in the name of Santa Muerte with herbs and whatever stones might be around, whatever they can bring in to convey their intent of what they're asking for. If they want love, they'll bring in roses. If they want money, they'll bring in currency.
I read one of your books recently, and it was interesting to me just to hear the discussion about, if you promise Santa Muerte you'll do something, then you need to do it. And
Hmm.
if she doesn't grant your petition, then you may be released from any kind of agreement you made. Do you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, that's more of a folk belief,
Okay.
and it has come into folk Catholicism where people will make contracts with their patron saint or whoever they think can help them. And basically, right, if you ask Santa Muerte for something, and if you specifically say, if you give me this, I'll give you that, that's when it becomes a contract. Um, just like the Catholics, you can just wake up in the morning and say, thank you, please let me have a good day and bless me with your love. That's not a contract. You haven't promised to give something in return. Um, one story I have from my mother. Um, this was not this was actually another folk saint, not Santa Muerte and not a traditional Catholic saint, but this was a promise she made to a figure called Juan Soldado, which means John the Soldier. He was someone who actually lived. He was a border guard stationed in Tijuana, and he was accused of a terrible crime against a child. And the story is that the people wanted blood. They they stormed the police station where he was being held. They demanded that he be released so that they could rip him to pieces. But the authorities said, we can't do that. We're not just going to execute this guy. But they found a loophole. And they said, but if he tries to escape, we can shoot him because he's a prisoner and we can shoot him if he tries to escape. So they brought him outside and they unshackled him and they told him to run for the US border. And as he ran, they shot him dead. And so, because of that story, he is a patron saint of migrants, people trying to cross the US border. They prayed to Juan Soldado so that he may bless them with the ability to complete the journey that he could not.
Wow.
And because he died in Tijuana, if you go to one of the municipal cemeteries, you'll see a chaplet, a chapel, a small chapel set up to him. But because of that imagery, that symbolism of crossing the line, making it over the border, people will pray to him. If they want to go become a doctor, they say, get me over that line, get me over the line to become a doctor, to become a lawyer, to get a good job. In the case of my mother, she wanted to become a mother. She wanted to become a parent. She was having trouble conceiving. She did not know why. This was the late 70s. Not a lot was known about options, but she had heard about Juan Soldado, and she made a promise to Juan Soldado and said, Juan Soldado, if you grant me a child, I'll name my first child after you. And eventually, my eldest brother was born, and when he was born, he was named John. A lot of people think that's short for Jonathan, but it's not. It's just John, which is the Americanization of Juan. Um, and so my mother was made the promise. She went to his holy site, asked for something specific, and in return offered something specific. And so when the deal was granted, when she had a child, she made good on her promise and named the child John after this folk saint.
How interesting.
Right. And and so that is a very common practice for things that people they are so serious about getting it. It's not just asking for a blessing of a meal. It's not just asking for a good day. They want something so bad that they're willing to give up something in return. And so you see this all over the place. It's very common with Santa Muerte. People will make offerings, what whatever you can think of. They will make a donation to an altar. One popular offer in return is to make a pilgrimage. So, like if people are outside of Mexico City, they might say, "I'm going to go to Tepito and visit your first altar in Mexico City, and I'll leave a candle for you there." There is this belief that if you don't make good, that she will take back what she has given. I take a lighter view from what I have seen because I constantly describe Santa Muerte devotion as a relationship. And just as you can fall in a relationship but still save it, there's always a chance to come back.
Somebody in the chat box, Nick, I believe, has asked why you see death as a female.
Yeah, that's why I see it. It's just because that's the way it was presented to me. At the altars in Mexico, sometimes you will see them with wigs and with dresses or gowns. They feminize the figure of death very clearly to convey that in Mexico, death is a woman.
Mhm.
I I believe, and also there's this idea that it is from a woman you were born, and also by a woman you will be taken out in life, right? I think that has something to do with it.
Right.
But there is this male figure down in South America, San La Muerte, which is just Saint Death, but it is a he for them. But and so I think the feminization of the Mexicans is just to differentiate, to say this is the Mexican death. This is not San La Muerte. This is not the male aspect. And in Mexico, they just, I don't know. It might have had a lot to do with a response against the patriarchy of the Catholic Church. They might have just been tired of bending a knee to a pope who was always a man, always being told how to live their lives by priests who were always men. And even if you look at the folk traditions, in this part of the world, in the Americas, also from Europe, if you go across the ocean. But in my experience, the practice of magic, especially in witchcraft, has always been inherently female. I'm going to speak heteronormatively for a second. It's always been traditionally female. And I think one reason for that is because historically, women had the least opportunities to advance themselves. If a woman wanted to advance her station in life for many years, for many hundreds of years, she was not going to school. She was not starting a business. She was not inheriting her father's land. She had to go out and find a man who would then elevate her status in life. Titles of nobility, they run through the male line very often. If a woman gets a title, it's probably because some man earned the title 100 years ago. So I think to embrace magic and witchcraft and these folk magic beliefs, you have to accept that it's going to come through the female line.
So what I'm hearing is that you perceive Santa Muerte as potentially very empowering for women.
Oh yeah.
Margaret has an interesting comment, which you kind of said this in a way a minute ago. She says there's an interesting correlation between the feminine nature of Santa Muerte and, of course, the mother of life goddess.
Mm.
On my pantheon, hers, Celtic-ish, has its own representatives of death. The concept of Santa Muerte, as I understand it, just from Arnold's discussion today, is somehow comfortable due to that feminine nature at beginning and ending of this lifetime.
Yes, there is a lot of that symbolism of being embraced by death. You're not being attacked by death. She's not coming for you. She is embracing you and carrying you to what is next, which I think is a very motherly energy.
Yeah. Well, I have left one question um, for later. Can you talk to us? Is it true that the, shall we say, darker elements of society are devoted to Santa Muerte? And if so, why?
Yeah, I mentioned I think I had a whole chapter in my book about that. Yes, there Santa Muerte is a saint of criminals. Um, it, I think it has a lot to do with um, the socioeconomic opportunities. Um, so if who is most likely to become a criminal or to engage in crime, it's probably not someone born with a silver spoon in their mouth. It's probably someone who comes into a time and a place where they got to scrap to get by, and things get scary and things get desperate, and desperate people will do desperate things. Um, and sometimes they will engage in crime. Um, and what I expressed in my book is that this idea of blending spirituality with your criminal work is not new. If you watch any documentary or movie about the Italian mafia, they talk about the family has this patron saint, and the Italians are, very Catholic. The same with in the Northeast, the Irish mafia uh, would have incorporated elements or symbolism. The Russian organized crime, if you look at their tattoos, uh, a lot of crosses, Christian symbolism. That's not a new idea, and I think what people forget is that criminals are not. Uh, they come from where they come from. So if I'm born in Russia in a bad neighborhood and I get picked up by some criminal group, I'm gonna take what I learned as a child, whatever stories I was taught. I'm gonna bring those with me into my work with the organization. The same is true in Mexico. If some kid is disenfranchised, has no opportunities, but they grew up in a house where their parents perhaps prayed to Santa Muerte, perhaps prayed to another Catholic saint. They're just going to bring that with them. They're not going to leave that at the door when they engage in their criminality. I think that's just basic sociology, that people bring their spiritual beliefs with them no matter where they go.
So just because you're a criminal doesn't mean you're completely devoid of spirituality. And it sounds like,
Right.
from what you've written, that Santa Muerte doesn't judge people one way or the other. She listens to
Correct.
whoever comes to her.
Right, exactly. If you are alive, then you will one day die, and it is by that we know that Santa Muerte accepts us all. Interestingly, the Catholic Church, in response, has made a push to try and bring people back into traditional Catholicism, especially the devotees of Santa Muerte, where they have said, instead of praying to Santa Muerte, consider praying to Saint Jude. He is also the saint of lost causes, or a saint of lost causes. And people who have to make illegal or unlawful decisions, if they don't feel comfortable with Santa Muerte, they will often go to Saint Jude, because he is often depicted as like the saint of uh, the saint of lost causes, the saint of prisoners, the saint of addicts, but more traditionally in line with traditional Catholicism.
Okay. Well, Arnold, let's see. Dana says, have you had any challenges studying Santa Muerte in academic research or people you've talked to?
I have not studied her academically. My academic studies are not in religious studies or spirituality. Um, so I think that because I'm not, you know, publishing people's names or anything, I can engage with the community just as a friend, and tell me about this. I'm really interested. At least when I first started, and but there is still, if you ask certain people questions, they'll make a quick glance to the door, like just to see if anyone's out there listening or something, or if they have to lower their voice.
I had
Um,
that happen once.
oh, really?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. It. Uh, so, like I said, it is much better, becoming much more open. And Mexico, by and large, is a very tolerant society. Even if they think you're going to hell, they're not going to, shout at you in the street. They'll just say, "Oh, that's interesting," and then get on with their lives. But still, you never know who might be offended by it. You never know, if your landlord has a problem with it. You don't want to get on their bad side, so you just keep it quiet because it's still a sensitive issue.
Yeah.
But no, personally, I've never had a problem um, asking questions or getting answers.
Thank you. We've got just a few minutes left. I wonder if you'd like to share with the group about the publishing that you've done and that you are offering for Cherry Hill.
Yes, great. I have published, I think 8 or 9 books so far about Santa Muerte. They're what I call recipe books, so more practical, how to make petitions for certain things, finding the right correspondences, and exploring your own. I actually will be publishing one, hopefully before the end of the month, a new one. But in my experience of gained through publishing, I published them all myself. Um, when I learned about Cherry Hill, um, I actually, around the time I taught my insights course. I taught the insights course for Cherry Hill back in October, and I had been toying with the idea of starting my own publishing house or publishing label, but I knew it would be very difficult to do it on my own. And I thought, well, if I could somehow join forces with Cherry Hill, I would have kind of a um, ready-made support system, especially with people who already want to read those types of books, in the spirituality, earth-based religion kind of niche. And so Cherry Hill and I came to an agreement to where we would partner to essentially become a publishing house, to form a type of university press under the name Cherry Hill Seminary Publishing. And so the offer that we're making to anybody who might be listening, anybody who might want to, who might find this out online, is that if you have a manuscript, if you have an idea for a manuscript, consider bringing it to Cherry Hill, and I will personally work with you as a mentor to bring your manuscript into something that can be published um, through the Cherry Hill brand. And there's an agreement. There's a sample contract we have online. I think it's online. If not, we can send it to you if you want to take a look at it. But it is because this is a commercial endeavor, but it's still being run by Cherry Hill, which is a seminary, which is
Nonprofit.
right, which is a nonprofit within the pagan community. The terms of the agreements that authors would enter into, I think, are very favorable, probably better than anything you would get from a traditional, purely capitalistic publisher out there in the rest of the world. So if you have an idea, if you have a manuscript you've been toying with, let us take a look at it and see what we can do together.
And I will say that the first book of yours that I have read was very attractive and yeah,
Thank you.
and
Thank
well
you.
written.
Thank you.
Do we have any, oh, and I put a link to information about that in the chat box. Does anybody else have a question or, we've had interesting discussion going on in the chat box. Do you have anything else you'd like to hear Arnold address?
No, if you have any questions or you want to connect with me offline, you can go to either one of my websites. I have an arnoldbustillo.com website or a santamuertemagic.com website. Both of those have contact forms. They go straight to my email. And if you're interested in the publishing endeavor through Cherry Hill,
I've put that address in the chat.
okay, great. I have a Cherry Hill Seminary email address where we can discuss your publishing projects. So please get in touch if you like. I try to answer the questions and comments as quickly as I can, but I will get to them.
Arnold, we want to thank you so much for giving us this special time. This was fascinating, and thank you to each of you who came today, and hope we'll see you again in another Cherry Hill Seminary class or program. So with that, I'll say goodbye.
Okay, thank you so much, Holly. I will talk to you later.
Thanks,
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.